I'm glad that you joined us today. We appreciate you doing so from the road because this is an important conversation about energy demand and how we're going to meet the moment. We have just been through a remarkable period of stress on the system with the heat wave and the heat dome over a good bit of the country. And we've seen headlines about reliability concerns, record demand that is not coming, it's already here and going to grow. And then some urgency around permitting and siting reform for investment. So given that very optimistic backdrop, I'm curious if you can talk to me a little bit about how you view the role of private capital and companies like yours to try to look at these opportunities and how you evaluate the risks that are in the energy space today.
Sure. Well, Todd, thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to our conversation. Power generation is the most capital intensive industry in the United States to begin with. And now we're hitting an unprecedented period of demand growth. I like to say for the last several decades, 30 years plus, demand growth has been pretty flat.
Yeah.
Because any growth in population or GDP has been offset by energy efficiency. But now, the confluence of everything from onshoring of manufacturing to obviously AI is what everyone's talking about, but it's not the
Yeah.
only source of demand. The theme of electrification has taken hold, and we have some states that want us to just electrify everything and maybe even no longer have gas to the home or the business, electric vehicle demand. So demand is here, and it's large and it's diverse, and we need capital to make that happen more than ever before. And I like to say I'm in the business of reliability. Some say you're in the business of making electrons or creating electricity. No, we're in the business of reliability, and reliability needs capital, and we are stewards of capital for our investors. But now more than ever, I think we're needed, and it's reliability, but it's also growing the U.S. economy. The U.S. economy has a unique opportunity with AI to put a lot of capital to work and grow GDP and reduce deficits.
Great. Well, you have laid out a lot of what we're going to cover. So let's take two steps back if we can and talk a little bit about how you founded Energy Capital Partners.
Sure.
It's been more than 2 decades. And what were some of the trends or motivations that you had in order to make that decision? And
Yeah.
how have they evolved over time? Is it the same understanding you had, or have things changed? As we've seen pretty dramatic changes over the last 3 or 4 years, but kind of talk about how you got started
Sure.
and then how it's evolved over time.
Well, believe it or not, I started in the electricity sector. I hate to disclose my age, but in 1983, maybe we'll say I was 2 years old. So I'm not
Fair
more
enough.
credit. But 1983, I landed at an investment bank, Goldman Sachs, and they put me in a group called Pipeline and Utilities. And interesting that all my friends were chasing technology. I think right around then is when Microsoft went public,
Oh, that's funny.
and they were chasing the exciting stuff.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't know about that. Back then, building nuclear plants and even some coal plants, and I was doing one financing after another, an equity raise after another
Hmm.
for companies that have changed their names, like Philadelphia Electric and
Right.
the like. And so I immersed myself in learning everything then about a regulated utility because we didn't really have competitive markets.
That's right.
I did a lot of FERC testimony. They had to, in the pipeline world, they have to figure out the appropriate
Yep.
rate of return and those type of things. So I learned the guts of what made an electric utility work, and we'll use this word reliability, but I learned about reliable, safe, environmentally compliant
Hmm.
operations. Fast forward late 90s, all of a sudden deregulation starts kicking in. And I like to say, in the United States, and we were following a little bit of the lead of the UK, but we were
Right.
deregulating industries, all with the purpose of reducing prices for consumers,
Hmm.
insurance, banking, airlines,
Yep.
natural gas. And then it was the turn for the electric utility. And when one looked at an electric utility, I like to say roughly 50% of the assets are in power generation, 35% or so in distribution, 15% long haul transmission. Those transmission lines and distributions are kind of natural monopolies.
Yep.
The power generation doesn't have to be a natural monopoly. And it was a real focus is, does it really make sense that a regulated utility is kind of buying from itself, its own power generation, to move over to the transmission and
Yeah.
distribution? Are they getting the best deal? Or maybe we should have a model to shop the market. So I was part of that and, advising companies like Pacific Gas and Electric and and the like of how to deregulate. And what dawned on us at Goldman Sachs that electricity, which was a monopoly good priced by regulators,
Hmm.
was going to become a good priced by the marketplace. And so we really needed to develop risk management tools to understand how this commodity, and very importantly, really the only major commodity that can't be stored.
Right.
We got batteries a little teeny bit. Um, but if you have a commodity that is an essential for any working economy and
Yeah.
you can't store it, it's like think about having a business and you have no inventory and it has to be readily made right then when demand walks in the door. Boy, that's tricky
Yeah.
to manage that. So did all of that and then, built the risk systems at Goldman. We had several hundred people doing that. And then we felt we were knowledgeable enough. We studied and got educated on markets all over the country. And we'll get to this, but the rules are all different and the
Yeah.
fuel types are all different. So we had a lot to learn before we started buying physical assets because utilities were forced to divest
Yep.
of power plants and someone had to come in and buy them and know how to manage them. So since then, I think we've owned over 300 power plants. But I spun out of Goldman Sachs in 2005. So I formed Energy Capital Partners with the goal to be a large, leading, preeminent firm to provide capital to the needs of mainly the electric utility industry. And so we've been doing that for the past 20 years. We've raised over 30 billion of equity capital. And when you add a little leverage to that in some cases and many more dollars than that put to work. But there's about 100 of us refer to ourselves as ECP. And that was the journey. So I've always been in this sector. And
Well, and I didn't realize I owed you a thank you for your help in getting the markets to be restructured and getting us where we are. And I think consumers have benefited as a result of that work. So I'll afford you that compliment as
and
we.
I'll just say one thing, Todd. It is to me, it's so helpful because I came from a world back in 1983 that, the first 13 years of my career, I was working with
Yeah,
regulated
on the other
utilities.
side.
And I understood the challenges of regulated utilities and dealing with regulators and growing rate base and getting a fair rate of return and raising capital and keeping their credit ratings. But then I worked with them to, okay, the consumer comes first.
Yeah.
How are we going to get prices down and how are we going to create competition? So
Yeah.
very different model. So I've been
Yeah.
on all sides of it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So as you think about that as ECP, how do you balance investment in reliability focused assets like natural gas and the growing interest in clean energy and decarbonization goals? I mean, how do you fit those pieces together?
Well, I like to say the core competency is managing an electron.
Hmm.
You can't tell an electron that you happen to be born green or you
Right.
happen to be born from nuclear or a fossil source. An electron has a mind of its own. So once that electron is created, it has to be managed effectively. Back to my three priorities: reliable, safe, and environmentally compliant
Yep.
operations. But we're agnostic. We're agnostic to producing the electron, whatever fuel type that may be, because if our priority is reliability.
Hmm.
So we evaluate what the market gives us,
Yeah.
evaluate risk and reward. We're very proud. I think we've owned and operated. We're a control investor. We're not a speculative investor. We're not a hedge fund taking a position in somebody else's stock. We have over 20,000 people in operations. We own, operate as a
Yeah.
control investor power facilities, maybe 37 gigawatts of renewables across wind, solar, geothermal. We've owned a lot of hydro. And I think something like 8 gigawatts of storage might make us one of the largest owners,
Yeah.
developer of battery storage projects. So all aspects of it. And we price risk and we provide capital. And we certainly focus on operating whatever those assets are in a manner to achieve high reliability standards for the marketplace.
So you've talked a lot about private capital and kind of that's where you live. That's your bread and
Yeah.
butter. So how do you view that the role of private capital in the energy expansion or particularly in competitive power markets? Because sometimes we hear people on the other side of the argument say, well, they're not willing to invest or we're not seeing investment in competitive markets and private capital won't flow. And that's an argument for us to go backwards. How would you respond to that?
Well, I start with this is a capital intensive industry. And when it hits periods of growth, and through my career, I've been through periods of growth.
Hmm.
Back when we were building a lot of nuclear plants in this
Yeah.
country, oh my goodness, it was challenging to get capital. We've had bankruptcies of utilities,
Yeah.
Long Island Lighting and Pacific Gas and Electric.
Yeah.
Um, we've had times when the utilities were borrowing debt capital at 18%.
Ooh.
And so you can't just assume that capital is always there and capital grows on trees. And as I said, the most capital intensive sector in the economy, and
Hmm.
now we're hitting a huge growth phase in demand. And so that capital is essential. If that capital isn't available, reliability measures sink and
Yeah.
prices go up.
Yeah.
And so we have different market structures around the country. Not all of the market is deregulated.
Hmm.
Um, but based on that, and by the way, when we invest, and we'll get into this in PJM, or when we invest in ERCOT, or we invest in California, we have to evaluate different rules and
Yeah.
different market structures, and we will do that. But we are long-term owners of power facilities. I'd say thank goodness, having been in it for so long, across my entire team, we add up to almost 1,000 years of experience in the sector.
Wow.
We have knowledge, and we understand, and I'll keep coming back to this at the end of the day. The goal of deregulation was to benefit the consumer, and benefit the consumer in two
Hmm.
ways: high reliability measures and low costs.
Yep.
More capital, therefore, more capital leading to more assets benefits consumers, benefits them, and more availability of megawatts and higher reliability measures. So we are there to provide capital, whether we're buying an existing asset, or we're building a new asset,
Hmm.
or a brownfield expansion.
Yeah.
You want someone that's got a very long dated mindset, that knows how to manage assets and do it in a very competitive way. So we bring capital to the party, and the party needs a lot of capital.
Yeah. And boy, your description is you don't just bring the financial capital. I mean, that's a very deep bench with, centuries of collective experience. That's a fantastic thing to be able to lean on. So as you think about that with all that experience, what are some of the key risk signals or policy red flags that you look at that cause you to pause when, capital is looking at places to
Oh,
invest and it says,
sure.
well, here or here? What are some of the red flags, or maybe what are some of the green lights that you say this is clearly where they want me?
Yep.
Maybe you can take it in either way you want to answer that.
Well, I'll come back again with the lens of, we want low prices for
Hmm.
consumers. We put discount rates on risk, as any investor would put
Yep.
discount rates on risk. If you're buying treasury bonds, at least so far, treasury bonds are viewed as safe in
Right.
the U.S. versus investing in a venture capital startup. You're going to
Yep.
require a higher rate of return. So we look at the rules, and we look at stability, and we price that risk.
Hmm.
There are times when we see a lot of volatility and changes in policies and regulations, whether they're environmental, market structure, regulatory.
Yep.
So we look at those factors, and if it's not clear which direction we're going, if we have market design changing and changing and changing, we're holding our assets for the long term.
Hmm.
And we're looking for stability, we're looking for certainty. And the closer we get to stability and certainty of what we're investing into,
Yep.
the lower the discount rate that we apply,
Yep.
and the more aggressive we can be. Markets, financial markets, we live in a capitalistic system. It is structured based on pricing risk.
Yep.
Capital will flow if there's an appropriate risk reward. So we have to price risk, and we want as much stability as possible, because with
Yep.
more stability, the prices are lower, and we don't demand as high of a rate of return. Our
Exactly.
capital is cheaper if we
Yep.
see more certainty.
Yep. You recently did an interview on CNBC and did a great job, by the way, but you highlighted the importance of keeping the AI boom here in the
Yeah.
United States. A couple of questions around that. A, why do you think that's so critical? And you've got a pretty unique view, I think, given your breadth of the issues that you cover and the parts of the world that you invest in. But what are the risks of if we don't maintain that advantage here in the United States? And do you view energy policy as having a critical role in how we answer both of those questions?
Yeah, I come to look at the U.S. economy, and so many of us are focused and nervous and a bit scared of budget deficits and $37 trillion
Yeah.
of debt. And it's difficult to cut your way out of that, as Elon Musk has tried on that
Yeah.
and maybe some success. But there's only so much. The federal budgets, most of that capital is capital that's non-discretionary.
Yeah.
And then we have this fun period of tariffs to bring in some new revenues, and maybe that'll help a little bit. But big picture, we have to grow GDP.
Mm-hmm.
Growing GDP creates a larger tax base, creates employment, but it allows us to start eating away at this deficit.
Yep.
I think that's one of the most important for future generations. How are we going to get a handle? Because that just spirals and spirals. We're spending maybe $2 trillion a year on interest expense, and we can't have that keep happening. So how do we grow the economy? Well, I'd like to say this current administration, I'm going to call it a gift from heaven, that AI shows up.
Yeah.
Incredibly capital intensive. If you look at the announcements of the major hyperscalers, the Microsofts, Amazon, and Google, they're approaching something in the neighborhood of $400 billion a year of capital that they want to inject into AI here domestically in the United States. But no electricity, no AI.
Yep.
And we'll get to the other piece of it. As electricity comes along, these hyperscalers, they want reliability. We call it the 5 nines, 99.999%. That's going to be, for the most part, be natural gas for our generation. So it's also going to mean greater production of natural gas in this country. So for the economy to grow, for the economy to shrink this deficit, to have an industry thrust upon us that can put several trillions of dollars of capital to work, that's usually the struggle of any administration, politician. How can we get business to invest more?
Yeah.
Well, this is a godsend.
Yeah.
But it doesn't happen without electricity. So all eyes are on electricity. How are we going to get the megawatts available in a timely manner to make this happen so we can grow the U.S. economy? And if we don't, I read an article in the Wall Street Journal today, China's sitting right there and ready to do it. It was an alarming article that I read this morning, that as we maybe are going a little slower than some would like, China's not going so slow.
That's right.
And we may lose a little bit of the race of where will all of this computing power for the hyperscalers and all this AI, where will it be located globally? It doesn't have to be in the United States, but we have a big advantage and we have a head start. So our fingers are crossed that we can help keep us in a leadership position.
Yeah. Let's make hay while the sun shines, if you'll pardon the analogy.
Yes, sir.
So as we talk about AI and data centers and the critical importance of the United States winning, what strategies would you encourage the United States to adopt in order to make sure we can meet the demand domestically?
Well, these hyperscalers, right, the largest balance sheets in the world, there's three things they're looking for. Speed. When you're Microsoft and you're spending $80 billion a year, and that's investor money that they're spending, those investors expect a return. They don't want to be sitting around waiting 5 years to have those data centers built out.
That's right.
So they want speed. They want electricity coming online in the next 2 to 3 years.
Yep.
They want scale. These are not small projects. These are not 50 megawatt projects. These are 500 megawatt plus. And location's important, right? In and surrounding metropolitan areas, so that these hyperscalers, AI systems can be responsive to all of the burgeoning needs of how AI can hopefully add a lot of efficiencies to our economy. So, and they want electricity that is reliable, because they don't want to be interrupted, or they don't want to be interrupted that much. And so they need a reliable, consistent source of electricity in large scale in a timely manner. And without that, they're not going to spend the capital. And if they don't spend the capital, our economy is not going to grow. And by the way, I hate to go back. I guess I was an economics major in college. But
It's fine.
Why is it so important that the economy grow? Well, obviously, we want employment. We want full employment. We want fair and growing wages. And we don't, I hate to say this, not to pick on a country like Argentina and hyperinflation. They're doing a better job. But if we don't get control of all this deficit spending, that has been a bit of like a cancer, the value of one's dollar, the value of one's earnings, can't buy that much. All tied together, And never before has electricity been thrust into a leadership position
Mhm.
of being the sector that has to succeed for all of this to fall in place.
Yeah, it sounds very linear, like one plus one really is three in this instance. Like we've got to do all of these things at
Right.
the same time. And I think we're positioned to do it, certainly with, and folks like you being willing to help with that. And that's going to require modernization of our infrastructure. It's kind of what we have, and it's also what we need to add. And you mentioned the need for new resources, but how do you think about the existing fleet? Like we've got to keep things around that could otherwise
Yeah.
retire, and that's a reliability concern. You've been very clear about your focus on reliability. And then how do you think about, are there ways for us to measure investments that are more urgently needed to support AI? And I'll give you an example and you can take it the way you want, but grid enhancing technologies and the ability to utilize the existing transmission infrastructure more efficiently, or maybe there's other things. How do you think about some of those things? Because that's a quick way for us to start up the path and then have time to get where we all want to go.
Yeah. Well, I want to go a couple directions on
Okay.
this. I remember when I have to say back in the 80s when I was getting educated on this electric utility system, I had a big map in my office of the entire grid and
Hmm.
every electric system, and it was color coded for different utility service
Okay.
territories. And I said to myself, who the heck designed this? This looked like the most inefficient patchwork.
Yeah.
And when I spend time in other countries around the world, if I go to France, there's one big utility named EDF.
Yeah.
I go to Germany, there's a big one, RWE. I go to Spain, Iberdrola and Endesa. But we decided, and it's a long story back to the 1935 Public Utility Holding Company Act,
Yeah.
that as we electrified the nation, this societal good called electricity is so essential and so important to communities that it ought to be somewhat regionally controlled
Hmm.
and regionally electrified. So we have an inefficient patchwork. And if we had to do it all over again, I bet we wouldn't have built it the
We
way that
might design it differently.
we might design it differently. And so I start with the grid, and the grid isn't as efficient as possible, and absolutely avoiding line loss and being able to
Yep.
move those electrons more readily and getting around transmission constraints. There's transmission constraints everywhere. And if those bottlenecks can be loosened,
Yeah.
obviously we can get that much more for the customer without having to build expensive new resources.
Yep.
This demand surge, I hate to say it, came at the worst possible time because we're in the midst of supply shrinkage,
Yeah.
right? We're not awash in supply. We used to be 70% coal and nuclear as our capacity. Todd, maybe 15 years ago, we were at 70%.
Yep. I
Now we're
think
down
that's right.
about 40% of coal and nuclear and shrinking. And nothing against nuclear. The US is still the world's largest generator of nuclear power. I don't know if it's something like 94 operating reactors, but they're old. And I go back to my 80s. I financed a lot of them
Yeah.
back then.
You know better than most.
And so some built even in the 60s, but 70s and 80s. And
Yeah.
not all of them are going to have their useful lives extended. Notwithstanding, in the last few months, we all have a little bit of a little more love coming the way of nuclear. I think we're losing more nuclear megawatts than we are growing. And then coal, age, environmental challenges, but we need those assets more than ever. And I think you're going to see coal and nuclear, the shutdown is going to slow
Yeah.
for liability reasons. We need them and we need to run them. But unfortunately, we need more to satisfy this demand and to
Hmm.
meet what's been shut down. We didn't talk a lot about renewables, but coal and nuclear are base load, running 85, 90,
Yeah.
95% of the time. You can't replace them with intermittent renewables that run maybe 25 or 30% of the time. And so the role of natural gas has been rising dramatically. I
Yep.
think probably 40% of our generation now comes from natural gas fired generation because it can provide that round the clock reliability. So that's been a big part of our focus. So it's getting new megawatts in the right place, extending the life of existing assets, debottlenecking the grid, all of these to find the most cost effective solutions in the near term.
Yeah.
Because we saw what the weather was in the past week or so.
Yep.
Markets are tight.
Yeah.
Markets are really tight. And all we need is an unfortunate outage of a big facility on a day when the temperature is over 100 degrees in New York City, and we could be on the verge of blackouts. So we got a
Yeah.
lot of work to do.
Yeah. And it's interesting you observe that. And I think that's right. And I think the interesting part is other parts of the country that are not competitive, that are vertically integrated, are suffering through many of the same challenges.
Mhm.
And there's really two or three, each one of which you could build a career on. And we have two or three of them all happening at the exact same time. So the challenges are significant, but they're also right in front of us, as you know.
Yeah, and speed and electric utilities, regulated utilities play an important role, but we need speed.
Yeah.
We need flexible capital and
Yep.
need things to move quickly because we're playing with fire here in
Yeah.
terms of reliability and availability and what would happen to the economy. One, if we couldn't meet the current needs and we've got blackouts, and two, if we can't take advantage of the growth from AI.
Exactly right.
So we're very proud, fast, nimble capital. I like to say if we need to make a decision in an hour at ECP, we'll make a
Hmm.
decision in an hour. Thoughtful decision, but we'll
Sure.
move quickly. And I
Yeah.
think that's one of the big benefits of private capital that we can jump in a very, very quick manner, which is what the market needs right now.
Yeah. So thanks for making that transition for me, because I was going to ask you about how are competitive electricity markets attractive to investors like ECP? And as you think about that, what are some policy or regulatory shifts that would make it even more attractive for capital to flow?
We want consistency of rules, and whether it's environmental rules, whether it's market structure rules,
Right?
it's just regulatory rules in general, that capital is going to flow more readily if we have 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 years of consistency
Yeah.
and not challenge. And even if it's maybe the rules are in place, but we see maybe a lot of rhetoric coming from regulators, or
Hmm.
maybe there are regulators calling conferences to challenge the way things are being done. We watch all of that,
Yep.
and we have to handicap whether
Hmm.
things are going to change, and we have to price that in. And if we have to price in uncertainty, that means the cost of capital is higher and the cost of the product eventually goes up. So it's not for me to say I want this policy or that policy.
Sure.
It's really consistency around it is the key because we have different market structures. We have markets with
That's
capacity.
right.
We have markets that are energy only markets and they can work. We have a big debate going on front of the meter, behind the meter,
Right.
on the whole
Yep.
AI. I think we're going to have a combination of both. It's not that one is bad and what is good, but let's put those rules in place that are consistent. So that's our big ask. I mean, the other thing I'd say, but you didn't exactly ask this, but you talk about private capital. And sometimes we get labeled with, oh, those Wall Street types, they just want to make a buck, quick in and quick out. They don't care about reliability. People don't maybe realize where our money comes from. The vast majority of the money is pension money. Retired
Exactly.
teachers, retired firefighters, retired police, retired government workers investing their pension, and they want a fair rate of return on their pension. That's where our money comes from. That's who we're managing it on behalf. And these are folks that are long-term focus.
Yeah.
They don't want me to lose their money.
That's right.
And so we have a reputation to uphold and a prudent steward of capital. Just look at some of the states and look at the pension obligations that have been promised.
Right.
There's a funding gap, and the best way to close that gap are good returns.
Yeah,
So,
I think that's a great reminder. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think sometimes people do lose sight of that. So, as you think about those investments, how do you evaluate market signals, or how do you think about market signals if you're in our
yeah.
space? How do you think about them when you decide invest or not invest, this project versus that project?
Sure. Well, let's take the pieces here. We obviously do our own projection of demand
Sure.
because in any business, you're looking at supply demand because we are taking on the risk of where our electricity prices are
Hmm.
going to be headed. It's not all the time that we can find a counterparty that's going to lock that in
Yeah.
with the price. We call it merchant risk. The market wants us to take merchant risk, meaning we own a power plant, and let's say it's a natural gas fired power plant. We're buying natural gas and we're converting it into electricity and we're selling
Yep.
electricity. There's a risk of where natural gas prices go. There's a risk
Hmm.
of where power prices go. And we're going to take on a lot of that risk. And by the way, in a regulated utility scenario, they're not really taking on that risk because the customer that is guaranteeing them a rate of return, I'm guaranteed nothing.
Yep.
Right? And so I have to manage this, which is why the market would want someone like us at the end of the day to bear that risk. Because in the case of a consumer in a regulated situation, the consumer is the one really, really bearing that risk.
That's
So we
right.
do extensive modeling of forecasts of demand. We also look at forecasts of supply. Who else is developing a project that can compete? We have to analyze the transmission grid. Who can wheel power into our node of where we're operating and the like, and where can we move power? What markets can we serve? Natural gas pipelines, access to natural gas. That's been a bit of a frustrating area.
Hmm.
We're going to need a lot more molecules in this country. We're exporting LNG, and power generation is growing.
Hmm.
And we got to make sure that those infrastructure systems on the pipeline side are put in place. So we look at those aspects of it. Obviously, if we're buying an older piece of equipment, reliability is important. We don't want a unscheduled outage. So we've
Right.
got to budget for proper capital to go into the project to maintain it appropriately. So these are all pieces of analysis that we put into the equation in terms of what a fair price is. One thing I will say is that the new build price of a natural gas plant has probably doubled in
Yeah.
the last 5, 6 years, coming out of COVID, coming out of supply chain. I don't know if it's $2,000 per kW. We saw some forecast maybe even a little higher than 2,000 per
Right.
kW. That's maybe double of what it was not too long ago.
That's right. It's no longer 1,000.
It's no longer 1,000. The gas turbine manufacturers, GE, Vernova, Siemens, Mitsubishi, they used to have a lot of manufacturing capability in the United States, but we stopped growing.
Yep.
And that moved to other parts of the world. We needed to come back. But in the meantime, getting that equipment is pricey. And that all works into the equation of
Yeah.
where are we going to get our transformer? Where are we going to get our equipment? So we have to look at things like tariffs.
Hmm.
Fortunately, doesn't impact this sector too much, but we're looking at all that's changing in the Inflation Reduction Act and all those kind of things,
Right.
hoping for some stability.
It doesn't sound like the simplest business that one could get into
No,
when you consider all the variables. You clearly have demonstrated the ability to get your hands around it and do it really well.
you need, managing risk. Again, one of the earliest things I said here in our chat was a commodity that can't be stored.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't get carried away that battery technology has not advanced very much in the last 50 years. In general, we may be the best systems. We're getting an extra 4 hours or so. We're not turning solar into a 24/7 resource. So this commodity still generally can't be stored.
Yep.
And that adds a significant risk factor. And I think it causes a lot of capital to shy away because
Yeah.
this is very complicated and the rules are not homogeneous around the country.
That's right.
You spend all your time understanding ERCOT. Well, you need to start over when you go to PJM because it's
Exactly right.
entirely different. So there aren't a lot of folks that have the knowledge base to put up risk capital.
Yep.
And so our capital is in demand given the supply demand challenges in the marketplace.
So you mentioned the need for additional infrastructure, and we were talking about pipeline infrastructure as you were talking about it. But as we think about it more broadly, what are the specific or what are the pressing policy reforms around accelerating infrastructure development? What kind of permitting and siting changes would
Yeah.
make it easier for you to move quickly to meet the moment that we
Well,
were talking about a minute ago?
well, one of the things I'll start with when we're looking to invest capital, whether building an asset or buying an asset,
Hmm.
speed of approval.
Yeah.
The United States, unfortunately, we got a lot of agencies at the federal level. We got a lot of agencies at the state level, and not all are nimble and not all are known for speed. We've had decisions go on for over a year in cases, which is unconscionable.
Yeah.
Because again, our product is essential for a functioning economy.
That's right.
It shouldn't take that long. So regulatory clarity, regulatory speed. If you're going to say no, can give us good
Yeah.
reasons and say no in 2 months,
Yeah.
not 12 months. And the same thing with permits. We have to be transparent, or I wouldn't be in business if we weren't transparent.
Right.
But put processes in place at the local levels, the state levels, the federal levels that allow us to put that forward. It's all too easy for interveners to come in. And I'm not saying that interveners shouldn't be allowed in free speech, but come in time and again to disrupt the process and slow the process down. There has to be a voice of we're trying to grow the economy. We're trying to provide reliability. We're
Yep.
trying to have low prices for consumers. But the process in this country is beyond cumbersome. And maybe the federal government is trying to streamline some of that. And we look at states. Our capital is mobile. It can go wherever it wants.
That's exactly right.
I'm not going to pick on certain states, but I know what they are in my mind. There are certain states I'm not going to invest in.
Yeah.
There are certain states that maybe they offered us up incentives to build power plants, and then maybe they yanked those incentives.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm not going back there.
Yep.
And so we look at the rules and we look at the states, and you're going to see some states are just more challenged in terms of consumer rates. We know what states those are. And
Yeah.
there's states that are more challenged in terms of reliability. And in many cases, we'll put the fault of that right at that state and right at the legislators and the regulators in those states
Mm-hmm.
because they've created an environment where capital just is not comfortable being there. And some states do it better than others.
Yeah. Well, let's try to be optimistic then. So let's look forward a
Okay.
little bit and say, as we look at innovation and technology, how does ECP look at newer or emerging technologies when you consider how you're going to deploy capital? Are those things that you think, yeah, we're interested in
Yeah.
advanced nuclear, or we're looking at some other technology that we're not ready to talk about, but are those things that you're looking at as well?
Well, I'll start. Let's just go in the world of renewables. We won't
Okay.
go through all of them. And we're in love if you can find baseload renewables. So that would be geothermal
Yeah, that'd be great.
and ways to expand and technologies to expand geothermal capacity. We own the geysers in Northern
Hmm.
California, which probably provides a lion's share of renewable electricity in California. But we look for technologies around that one. We want the price of solar panels to keep coming down. And we hope we build more manufacturing capacity here in the United States
Right.
and keep bringing those prices down. And we are students of battery technology. We're not a venture capital firm. We're not going to
Hmm.
invest in new technologies, but we're rooting for that because solar is peak coincident.
Yeah.
When the sun is shining, that's when demand is high. And
Yep.
if we can add effective batteries to that to turn a 6 hour resource into a 10-hour resource, that's a great thing. So we certainly look at all of that. It's alarming that the price of bringing on a new gas-fired power generation is $2,000 or maybe $2,500 per kW. So we're
Hmm.
very much look at what can happen with gas turbines
Yep.
and new technologies there to get those costs down. And I think all of the manufacturers are very focused on that. We actually made a purchase of an aeroderivative turbine manufacturer. I never thought I'd be buying a turbine manufacturer, but
And
because of
here we
this
are.
shortage, here we are. And having something that is more of a modular basis,
Yeah,
it can be provided as backup. As with these behind the meter situations for AI, we're going to need more backup generation.
that's right.
And so we're looking at things not necessarily going to be all diesel generation to do that, but are there more effective things, distributed generation and new technologies around distributed generation. And then you mentioned just getting more out of the grid and technologies that can improve just the efficiencies around the grid. Now, nuclear is a tough one. You know, the history, as we well know, is cost overruns.
Yep.
And back to my map of the United States, I think technically we have something like 3,000 utilities. When people forget Austin, Texas and Anaheim, California, those are their own. There's so many, meaning we don't have huge balance sheets. And to take on a nuclear project,
Yeah,
which is in the billions of dollars, and the history, what the last one I guess would be Vogtle and Southern Company,
yeah.
not a pretty picture in terms of massive cost overrun. So there's not a lot of folks that have the balance sheet to take that risk.
Hmm.
So along comes maybe smaller modular reactors. I think there's something like 95 technologies on the drawing board, and we're rooting for it. But because there's 95 of them, there's only so much risk capital that
That's
would
right.
go to that. And so it's hard for them to come by capital. I think it's going to be very hard for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, are they even staffed, to figure out which of these they're
Yeah.
going to approve. So I think we're a long way off from a true nuclear
Hmm.
renaissance of new building. I know GE found a way to maybe do a smaller boiling water reactor up in Canada. They're building one,
Right.
but it's very expensive. So nuclear is wonderful from high capacity factors and green,
Sure.
but capital cost is high, and I think we're way off, at least in this country, from seeing it. Other parts of the world, Asia and the Middle East, where we're seeing nuclear happening. So in the near term,
Yeah.
natural gas fired generation is going to be the dominant piece of
Yep.
the equation.
Yep. I think we definitely agree on that. So as we look to the end of our conversation here, just a couple of questions to kind of have you put a bow on
Sure.
things. So what do you think is the most misunderstood aspect of private equity's role in the energy landscape?
Well, it's maybe the one that I said of where our capital comes from, right?
Yeah.
And retired teachers and workers and endow. My very first investor, I have to travel the world raising capital.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very proud, especially when I bring capital in from overseas. That capital doesn't control us. They're called limited partners,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they don't tell us where to invest,
Yep.
how to invest. And I'm proud that I've been able to go around the world and tell people how wonderful a sector electricity is and give me that capital that I can manage on your behalf and bring it into the U.S. economy.
Mm-hmm.
We should be applauded that we are bringing capital to the party and some of that capital, foreign capital that we control, but
Yeah.
that we are helping to manage the pension obligations that this country has to the great workers that help build this country. So that's probably one is misunderstood. Number two is we are our physical asset owner operators,
Yeah.
right? And it's a harsh environment out there, and safety is everything. So we care deeply about our workers and giving them a safe environment and taking care of those folks. Environmental stewardship. If we take that lightly, if we screw up air emissions, water,
Mm-hmm.
noise, all of the above, we're out of business.
Yeah. That's
And
your social license to operate, right?
I mess up once, it's goodbye.
Yeah.
It's more than taking that seriously. It's a lifestyle. It's a priority,
Yep.
how you behave. I don't think the world thinks of private capital in that way.
I think that's right.
Environmental stewardship, stewardship of our workforce, playing by the rules. And at the end of the day, reliability is my product.
Yeah.
And I have to do a good job of that or I'm out. So those are the pieces. If we didn't exist, there'd be less capital
Oh,
and
yeah.
prices would be higher and reliability measures would be lower.
So, Doug, I'm going to give you the biggest softball I think I can throw you here to close with, which is if you could offer policymakers one or two suggestions about what would help create an investment-ready power sector, what would they be?
Well, I've kind of said it, but let's all put our heads together and come up with a set of rules and market structure and go with it. We could debate this forever.
Yeah.
There's people that make a living putting on conferences to debate this,
Yes, there are.
right? But let's pick a path
Yeah.
because speed matters. Because back to it is a competitive world, and China is quite a competitor.
Mm-hmm.
We have an opportunity to grow the U.S. economy, get our deficit under control, but let's not mess it up with a myopic focus of months and months debate behind the meter and the front of the meter that there's a
Right.
theoretical scenario that a megawatt hour could be pulled in this direction and might disadvantage a customer. The society will be better off if we can grow the economy, get this AI together,
Yeah.
and let's make it happen in as quick of a fashion as possible, a responsible fashion, but a quick as a fashion. If we study this for the rest of time, our country gets left behind.
Yeah.
So speed, put the rules in place, and then try to leave it alone
Yeah.
as long as you can, so
Yeah.
we have certainty, and that will reduce the cost of capital, and that will mean lower rates for consumers. So that would be my long-winded wish.
Doug, that is a great note for us to end on. So let me thank you very much for taking an hour of your time to visit with us. And we certainly appreciate it. We know you're very busy. We appreciate what you do and for sharing a different perspective that perhaps people aren't familiar with. And I think it's important for people to have a handle on.
Well, thank you, Todd, for having me. Thank you for you and your team and all that you do. Much appreciated, and thank you.
Thanks much.